Good evening. If you would turn to Matthew chapter 13, it's where our text will come from tonight. Here Jesus talks about a farmer in one of his parables who spreads seed. But in that he hides some important messages. So we'll be starting in verse 3. And it says, "Then he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places, where they did not have much earth, but immediately sprang up because they had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, they were scorched, because they had no root. They withered away. And some fell among thorns, and thorns sprang up and choked them. But others fell on good ground and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Let's start at the beginning, the hard ground. This is the ground that hears the word, but they don't understand it. And before they can produce fruit, the devil snatches them away. Moving on now, we'll read, we will go to verse 18. "Therefore, hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom, but does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received the seed by the wayside." Now moving on, let's move to the stony ground. We'll now read verses 20 and 21. "But he who received the seed on stony places, this is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures only for a while. For when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he stumbles." Here Jesus tells about the soil that doesn't fight to the end, that doesn't persevere. These are the deserters, the people who fall away. Most of the time, all we can do is pray for them and love them, and sometimes they'll be restored. Now let's look at the third soil, and that is the thorny ground. Let's read verse 22 of Matthew 13. "Now he who received the seed among thorns is he who hears the word, and the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful." I, in my life, have felt the thorns of temptation and felt this soil. This is the soil that after a Christian hears the word and accepts it, and as a Christian, they realize they have to change, and that they don't want to change. And so they choose sin instead of Jesus, because the thought of leaving their sin is so unbearable. Now, let's look at the final soil, and that is the good ground. Matthew 13:23 says, "But he who received the seed on good ground is he who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100, some 60, and some 30. This is the soil that hears the word and understands it. The soil that hears the word and teaches it to others. But some producing 100, some 60, and some 30. But it's not the number of souls that counts, is it? It's the fulfillment of the Great Commission. In verse 9 of Matthew 13, it says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." But how can they hear without a teacher? if you would turn to one last passage, and that is Romans 14:15. Romans 10:14-15. And it says, "How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things." I challenge you this week as you go home, be courageous, preach the word. This past week in VBS, we sang a song, "This Little Light of Mine." Be the light. Be the farmer. Spread the word. The farmer didn't know where the seed would fall, but he spread it anyways. There's a story about another farmer. Most of us in here have heard it. But for those of you who haven't, a farmer was farming corn. And every year, on the other side of the field, that last row of corn would be completely unfruitful because the birds and the squirrels would eat everything. And this happened for years until he eventually just got fed up. And he said, "I'm not going to plant that last row." And so he didn't. And it happened to the next row the next year. And it kept going on. And he didn't plant the next row and the next row until eventually he didn't plant any. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't plant that last row of corn, who will? We must spread the word. 1 Corinthians 3:6 says, "I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase." Don't be like the farmer who didn't plant the last row of corn. Be like the farmer in Jesus' parable. Spread the word to everyone.